two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 11th of December 2017 from WBRN Radio in Boston and on the Bostonred Network. Away we go. This will be an interesting program. We have reports from Alabama on Roy Moore. Evidently, Uncle Roy was out at the Army-Navy game. An old stratagem, if you're ahead in the polls or you're confident that you're ahead in the polls, the less you say, the better you're off. So Uncle Roy has decided to take that particular situation going because, first of all, from Roy Moore's standpoint, Judge Moore is known by everyone in Alabama unless they have literally been in a cave. So therefore, he has 100% name recognition. Those that like Roy Moore like Roy Moore. Those that don't like Roy Moore do not like Roy Moore. The so-called sexual scandals, well, that's about washed out. We'll have a little polling where we can and show you what's happened there. It has pretty much run its course. The election is on Tuesday. Very little can be said now. Doug Jones, on the other hand, is making his rounds to various churches. Said he's been to 250 different towns, villages, hamlets, cities, any place he can go and find one person there. He's been there. Why is this? Because, well, first of all, Doug Jones is not as well known as Roy Moore. He's not in the line of being an infamous character around the scene. But he ran a campaign. He's got money. He had some momentum going on. We'll be looking on a Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, what have you, the effects of the recent deluge of so-called sexual harassment in the political theater and in entertainment and you name it. Various characters have come out from the first President Bush on the groping situation. We'll go to Minnesota and talk about Al Franken, his situation there. And, of course, in Detroit, the Motor City, we have a dire situation there with the Representative John Conyers Jr. resigning. Gateway Snyder, the governor there, has said that due to cost considerations, of course that's in line with his normal voter suppression operation, that there will not be an election to replace Congressman Conyers until November of 2018. So that's 11 months. People are up in arms about it. They'll go to court, no doubt about it. But it goes back to what was a stratagem. You don't force someone out when you have no one to replace them with. So rightly so, the constituents in Representative John Conyers' district are alarmed, are hurt. Now, whatever your overall stratagem is for the rest of Michigan, you no doubt will be counting them out. Followers of O.J. Simpson simply will not show up at the polls. They would have had it with that process. So some of these clever, cute schemes hatched in the halls of Congress and are not working out so well. And this is one of the problems that you have depending on what your stratagem is. In the Face the Nation discussion part, will be after us, you'll hear various pundits at Face the Nation talk about this. Now, obviously, the Democrats felt that they needed to get John Conyers Jr. out of there. He'd been there 52, 53 years. Before this election in Alabama, well, what does it amount to? Well, we'll have to see. If Doug Jones won, there'll be a big debate about it helped Jones. If Jones loses by more than 5 points, well, here we go again. But it was an uphill struggle to start with. And where does this leave the Democrats with their 2018 strategy? They've evidently, as Leroy Newt Gingrich said, and he's been around a long time, they've run to some weird Puritanism. Well, weird Puritanism, or petty moralizing as we call it, do not care the day. They sometimes help out, and you go back to Wild Bill Clinton and his basic scandals there. They were going to derail his campaign. It didn't work out. Bill Clinton went on with the help of Ross Perot of Dallas, Texas, to be elected president. And then, of course, he had Monica Lewinsky, all of that, and was impeached. Trial at the Senate. He was lucky that the Democrats were in control. And he was reelected by large numbers in 1996. So that story shows you the tenuous nature of these types of situations. And now, of course, you have social media. Everything is speeded up. The clock is speeded up. So thus, when you plan these stratagems, you're talking now about in 2017, in December, looking to November of 2018, the issues could completely be different. That is what the problem is. So instead of being clever for a day, you'll turn out being dummy for the duration if you start losing these races based upon that. Obviously, the stratagem is to appeal to middle-class voters in suburban locations around Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, the Virginias, etc., and the extra burbs. Pick up some moderate Republicans. That's been a Democrat strategy for a very long time. They ran it in 2016 and came up short on a very, very flawed. There were two flawed candidates there: Hillary the Monster Clinton, otherwise known as Crooked Hillary, and DJ Trump. But with all of the Access Hollywood tapes and all of that, Trump's people stood solidly. And Trump was able to get more voters to the poll than the monster. So that was it. A race that many said could be won, unlike the one in Alabama. It's very tenuous there. No one is predicting anything. But the whole point is this, that some of these stratagems just don't work out, and they're not there. When we look at the actual polling numbers, let's go back to Alabama so we can get rid of Roy Moore. I guess he's escaped. Not sure where the Army-Navy game was, but anyway, he was away this weekend. There, Bama goes to the polls. The Alabama papers, competent Doug Moore sums up his case for the Senate. Said Roy Moore is hiding. Well, Roy Moore is wise to hide, as we said before. He was at an African-American church, and he went on to say, he also spoke about the allegations that women had made. The UN ambassador Haley there has said that women should be heard. I imagine that didn't go very well with DJ Trump. He accused Moore of hiding from the voters and the press taking money, the press taking money from his charity instead of visiting and being ignorant on Alabama issues. Well, he's got one issue. He's got his statutes. He also spoke about the allegations women had made against Moore. I tell you, I'm only going to do it one time, Jones said. Just like Senator Shelby, he's a senator from Alabama today. I believe those women in whatever county that is, Etona County, just like Senator Shelby said today, where there is smoke, there is fire, and the fire is there. I'm so proud of those women and so many others because from the very beginning, we talked about women's issues that are important to the women of the state. I have an 86-year-old mother. I've got a wife. I've got a daughter. I've got 2 granddaughters, and those issues are important to me because they hit home to me, Jones said. I want to make sure that my granddaughters grow up, that they don't have to endure the kind of things the girls in Itawam County did, and sat silent for 30 or 40 years. The crowd was at the Progressive Union of Baptist Church. They had Cedric Richardson there. He is from Louisiana. And Richardson Richardson couldn't make it, the moderator said, but we do have Doug Jones. Well, I guess he wasn't there. Anyway, it would have been a disaster, Jones said, and you see the business leaders today expressing concern of where the state is going. If business goes south, folks, it's going south with your jobs. It's interesting he's using the term going south. Roy Jones sits across the table from an automotive executive thinking about Alabama, coming to Alabama 20 years ago. He talks about kitchen table issues, including jobs, health care. He asked crowds to imagine Roy Moore. And this is one of the last things, at least Jones's campaign is smart enough to understand that they go back more to issues where business is going. Jones says he supports Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIPS, that's the Children's Health Care Insurance Program. He refuses to say whether he would ever vote to fund it. Jones said more, and CHIPS, the reason is Roy Moore has consistently said he wants the government out of health care. Well, no doubt about that. Alabama should have expanded Medicaid when then Governor Bentley, who was resigned in disgrace, rejected the offer. We lost billions of dollars. Our rural hospitals are closing because there's not enough Medicaid dollars coming into the state to sustain them. We've got to change that, and we've got to do it by quit playing with your health care, period. You get this by reaching across the aisle, Jones said, but Moore would continue to divide us. Well, no doubt about that. Moore's never been built statues. That's about all Moore's going to have to say. I've been all over the state. This is 250 locations. Moore has done 2. He's not even in the state. He's at the Army-Navy game. Well, an old Army man, I suppose he'd be there. This is the last. The last was a dig at Mo Brooks. Mo Brooks, incidentally, is a senator from Huntsville. He canceled his town meetings there. He's endorsed Roy Moore. I heard lots of talk right now and lots of national attention. Jones said everybody's saying, who is Alabama going to be? This is not about who we are going to be. I know who we are. Roy Moore doesn't know who they are. Well, Roy is, as they say, dealing with religious issues, ecumenical issues, ecclesiastical is the word I wanted. Anyway, he said he isn't a perfect candidate, a perfect person. I haven't run a perfect campaign, but when you look at the race, he said he is gone to the people over and over again, and he talks straight. Moore closed with a reference to the prosecution of 2 Klansmen. That was at the 16th Street Baptist Church. People in this office said it was a long shot, and it was a long shot, but when you're on the right side of history, you can accomplish great things. When you're on the right side of justice, you can accomplish great things. Well, folks, I'm telling you, I feel it. This campaign at this moment in time is on the right side of history. There's no doubt about that, and we will not be stopped. Well, if he can motivate the followers of O.J. Simpson to turn out in great numbers and receive a decent number of moderate Republicans, he could win this race. If not, well, he'll come up short. That's an unfortunate situation. Let's go to Minnesota. And in Minnesota, the ex-governor there, his name is Arne Carlson. He's 83 years old, and he's addressing the situation involving their senator, Al Franken. When he posted a commentary, he said he's deeply troubled by the resignation of Al Franken and the complete absence of anything resembling a due process. As every lawyer knows, due process is an essential situation. He's an independent-minded Republican who endorsed Barack Obama in 2008, and unfortunately Hillary the Monster Clinton in 2016. He was elected governor of that state in 1990 and served until 1999. He asserted that Senate Democrats who asked Al Franken to resign may have been motivated more by the politics of Alabama's Senate race than the seriousness of the allegations. The closely watched race in which DJ Trump endorsed Roy Moore. In his commentary, he cited the servicing report saying that Franken's accuser, Leanne Tweeden, may have been coached by the infamous Roger Stone, a major operative, and described the unknown facts about the case. She, no doubt, was on Sean Hannity. This is Tweeden, and she voted for DJ Trump. That should tell anyone that's not an idiot that this thing was rigged against Franken from the very beginning. The ex-governor comments conceded with a backlash against a growing tide of the Me Too movement that has swept dozens of high-profile men out of positions of power in recent months with allegations of sexual misconduct. That's not a bad thing. Those critical of the pressure on Franken to resign have been both conservatives and some liberal feminists. A rush to judgment is unfortunate and all too human, Carlson wrote on Sunday, but a rush to punishment is totally unacceptable. He prefaced his remarks about Franken with a personal anecdote about how he was falsely accused of vandalism in 6th grade in the Bronx. He's from New York City. While I'm not always in agreement with Senator Franken, I firmly believe due process, which is a cornerstone of our democratic way of life. He was elected by we the people, and he should continue to serve until a legal determination has been made. No doubt about it, he said, within a few weeks, but from this mic, our opinion is that Senator Franken should stick around. There's no reason for him to leave, and it's a sad situation that John Conyers Jr. has left the house, so to speak. He's not Elvis, but for the people of that district, he is Moses, or whomever. Anyway, he is out of there, and from Detroit, this is from the Free Press. What Gateway Snyder does, no election to replace until November. This is in there, Rachel Raleigh. Anyway, it's right here. This is absolutely ridiculous. Democrats drummed out two of the most important members of Congress in John Conyers Jr. and Al Franken before Ethics Committee investigations could be complete against them of sexual misbehavior. That's not the most ridiculous part. They did it without calling for the resignation of DJ Trump. Here's the ridiculous part. Gateway Snyder has set the special election to replace John Conyers Jr. next September, 11 months from now. He feels the 13th district, congressional district of Michigan is unimportant and doesn't need a representative in Congress for almost a year. Let the lawsuits begin. You are going to have a void for 11 months. That's from Reverend Wendell Anthony, a pastor of the Fellowship Chapel and president of Detroit NAACP, said in an interview on the with me on the Superstation. The governor is saving money doing it at a time of the regular election, but he can put a monetary value on people's rights to representation. If it was me, I'd rather have it sooner. There are many issues pressing: the budget, the GOP getting the budget through health care, etc. One of the reasons that Republicans are so happy that Conyers is gone and Al Franken are gone. Remember the Beauregard session. Conyers, a skilled lawyer of more than 50 years, 60 years. Anyway, nonetheless, he questioned the hell out of him, and Franken questioned the hell out of him, and checked him. Now they are gleeful that these individuals, the stewards and civil rights, are gone. And this is what the issue is. And this so-called mania out there never took this into consideration. They figured, well, we'll be a little opportunist here. Progressive people have been warned back to the time of Karl Marx about going into these moralistic type of issues. You never win on that. You can win temporarily, but in the end, you turn into McCarthyism, and that's the end of that. Republicans care little about these things. Its members appear uninterested in avoiding a World War III. Now, that is one of the things that happened too. The Democratic Party aren't able to make a decent change in policy in the Republican Congress, had decided to take the high road and take the lead in changing the sexually hard environment in which women have to live, work, and survive for decades, sometimes in a salad rage. But in changing the environment, the Democrats may win the battle but lose the war. And that's part of the problem right there, because these birds have become more entrenched. So what do we do? Demos. They called two members of the league without planning what's next, without looking at what is needed for the 13th district there, that include rebounding from bankrupt Detroit. At the 13th, we left what's next to the Sharks, to the Republican governor. The Sharks are a dozen, are two folks who will vie for a representative Congress seat. They need a job, or they want the stature of being in Congress, whether they are qualified or not. Not everybody will be a bad choice, but many will. The Kanye's congressional staff are allowed to remain in the office, feel constituents concerned until a new representative elected. Well, at least they keep the job. And the governor in that case, you missed it, Gateway Snyder is appointed one of the employees included to serve as chair of a new public health advocacy group. This is out of Flint, Michigan. Can you believe this? Which is designed to ensure the safety and health of all residents. Eden Wells, charged with involuntary manslaughter in the tragedy, couldn't ensure the safety of the of French children by poison-tinted water. Is she the right choice? So the decision leaves the 13th without, this is the 13th district of Michigan, without leadership in keeping with other decisions he has made. He's talking about Gateway Snyder. Congress, like America, is at a tragic crossroads, and those who stand between Trump and chaos are becoming fewer and far between. This is by Rachel Raleigh, and she's on a super radio station, 9:10 a.m. Out of Detroit, I assume. Anyway, this is her commentary here. We agree with her. This is a very tenuous situation we are looking at. Let's go to the sports. Well, wait a minute. Let's first go to the public news service. A couple of articles here we wanted to get into. Out of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a hearing of the House Health Committee voted on Monday to send a restrictive anti-abortion bill to the floor. This is on the 6th, incidentally, of December, known as Senate Bill 3, which had already passed the state Senate, would ban all abortions after 20 weeks of pregnancy and make no exceptions for rape, incest, etc., fetal abnormalities. Anyway, procedures known medically as duration and evacuation account for less than 2% of all abortions. Lindsay Malden, Deputy Director of Planned Parenthood of Pennsylvania advocates, the full House could consider the measure on Wednesday and the final vote on Monday. Let me just make sure that on the 6th, okay. Well, I guess that's today then. Anyway, The Governor Tom Wolf has called the bill an attack on women and stated publicly he will veto the measure. This is a political move by the Speaker and other Republican leaders to draw a line in the sand, Malden said. This isn't about women's health. It isn't about protecting women. It's about politicians interfering with personal medical decisions. The old fight continues on. Let's move on here. In the Commonwealth, community organizers have twice the number of signatures needed to put family leave and a 15-hour minimum wage on the state ballot next year. They collected 275,000 signatures from 346 of the 351 towns and cities in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And according to Fortano, paid leave would allow workers to collect benefits equal to 90% of their pay, up to $1,000 a week for 16 weeks to care for a sick family member, etc. Employers and employees that would pay into an insurance fund would benefit workers who are taking a time off. Contribution to the new family and medical leave trust fund would be less than 2/3 of 1% of the salary. And of course you have the there out of Beaumont, Texas, I believe it is. This is dated on the 7th of December, 3 months after Hurricane Harvey. Southeast Texas, nearly half of the residents affected by the storm say they are not receiving the help they need to recover. A survey by the Episcopal Help Foundation, the Kaiser Family Foundation, found that African Americans and Latino families were hit the hardest, no doubt about that, and reported much higher percentage of loss to property damage and income. That's according to Eller Marks, the president of the Episcopal Help Foundation. Philanthropy has been very, very generous, and hundreds of millions of dollars have been raised. Marks said, "We wonder how those people, what to do with that money, and how the agencies they might distribute it to know who is needed and what kind of help." The study found that 2/3 of the residents in a 24-county region affected by Harvey suffered damage to homes, disruption there. Mark said Harris and surrounding counties have significant storm damage, but the Beaumont, Port Arthur, Corpus Christi, Rockport were the hardest hit. And only about half of the people whose homes were damaged had homeowner or renter's coverage, Marks said, and just 1/4 had a flood insurance. African Americans and Latino populations, all these areas, shown a greater need, and less progress has been made towards recovery, particularly with low income and vulnerable populations who often can be invisible in times like this. She said, "We've got immigrant problems who are afraid in the current climate, no doubt about it. Go there to get some aid for your home or apartment, and there is ice." The report also found that storm took a toll on people's mental and physical health, with 6 out of 10 storm victims reporting they have skipped or postponed doctor's appointments, had difficulty obtaining mental health service. We'll put this on here 3 months after, and this is 2/3 of 66% of residents across these 24 counties reported they suffered damage. And read more on this report. It shows a map, shows the people, the Episcopal Archdiocese recovery page, and some other things. This is the Episcopal Health Foundation, has a new voice in Texas, and we'll append this to our report. This is sort of our roundup. Now we'll go to sports, finally. Here we go. The basketball scores from a Sunday night. The Raptors were at the Kings. Raptors 102 to 89. The Celtics were in the Motor City. Celtics 91 to 81 over the Pistons. And in overtime, the Nuggets were in Indiana. The Pacers 126 to 117. The Mavericks and T-Wolves in Minnesota. T-Wolves 97 to 92 over the Mavericks. The 76ers and Pelicans in New Orleans 131 for the Pels and 124 for the 76ers. And finally, the Hawks and Knickerbockers in New York. Knicks 111 to 108. On to the winter meetings. We've looked at this, and we'll go down it. There has been a slow cooker of a month since the World Series ended, with little happening outside of Jerry Depot there. And Shazoo, whatever his name was, announced he's going to the Angels. Then the Marlins and Yankees agreed to Mr. John Carlos Stanton. He moves on to New York, join a happy group of people there. Stanton's dispatch, only a few teams, although maybe the Cardinals and Giants held out over moves. Anyways, the free agency, you have J.D. Martinez there. He's one of the best hitters available. He is a 30-year-old corner outfielder with below average defense. And then you have Darvish there. Remember Darvish, the pitch for the Dodgers. He is the best pitcher, but he had the Tommy John surgery, so we don't know about Mr. Lou Darvish. Eric Homer, terrific 2017 season, but is wildly inconsistent there. And does J.D. Martinez sound like a $200 million ball player? Well, there we go again. And 2018-2019, much deeper class of free agents. Bruce Harper's there. Matty Machado, Josh Danielson, Charlie Blackmon, and Clayton Kershaw. Will Clayton Kershaw lead the Dodgers and make his last time? Who knows? They're meeting, incidentally, at Disney World. It's a good place to meet. The White Sox first baseman Jose Aburi. Anyway, let's see, where is he going to? We've heard the rumors from the Red Sox about $40. We'll get it right in a minute. $40 million in arbitration there. So we have pictures from the Rays. Chris Archer, another meeting with Archer trade rumors. I don't know where he'll be. The Rays have a nice group of young starters. Brent Honeywell, Jose Dion there, and Brett Snell. Don't follow the Rays very much, but anyway, now we know who they are. Andrew McCutchen, he's with the Pirates, been around for a long time. His father used to be a coach. He's no longer an MVP, no doubt about that, but he's one season remaining until free agency. They look to deal him for Jared Cole, who has a 2-year left on his contract also. The Giants, they're looking there. They lost out on John Carlos Stanton. The Cubbies, they have somebody named Tyler Chatwood. But the big remain, what do they do with position players? They have Addison Russell there, Javier Baez, Kyle Schwarber, Ian Happ. He turned into be, as a rookie, one of the better ones there. Albert Amora Jr., 5 players for 4 positions. And then they have Ben Silvers. I don't know what to do with Ben Silvers. There, gone Mr. Jake Arrieta. They are no longer around. Anyway, the Dodgers, what they're going to set quietly, they have Joe Pederson, Enrique Hernandez, Platooning in left field, Alex Vega. Kenley Jansen, they need somebody to set up for him. They traded for Mr. Darvish last year to boost the rotation so they could acquire a new starter. What do you do with Mr. Darvish? The St. Louis Cardinals, Milo Mikolas? Anyway, for the rotation, but more needs to be done there. No doubt the Cards need some improvements. Billy Hamilton, he's center field, been around a long time with the Reds. Who else? The Dodgers in center field there. Yasmani Grandal, excuse me. He's out there. We don't know where he'll be. A little too early. I mean, these players are going to be traveling. And Carlos over the Cubs. Well, anyway, they're not exactly sure what to do with him either. Nonetheless, let's go to, this is from ESPN. There's grumbling and gragging here. We've already talked about Giancarlo Stanton. Giants need a power hitter. Well, they need power hitters, pitchers. They need a whole busload of people. J.D. Martinez is there, but they need somebody unquestionably hitting behind Buster Posey, who is their catcher with the Giants. And Lorenzo Cain, if the Giants are focused on the bench, then it would probably be a better alternative. Not sure. A shift of Denard Span to left field, but Cain is not a power hitter. They need some power there. Mike Mukakis at third base. I don't know. A lot of questions this time of the year. The Cardinals plan to move Dexter Fowler. Dexter Fowler was one of the cement of the Cubs, and unfortunately the Cubs traded him to the Cardinals, and the Cubs ended up, as they say, home watching much of the postseason on TV. Tommy Pham will take over in center. That's for the Cardinals. And the Red Sox, middle of the order there. Craig Kimbrell, Drew Palorance, and Chris Sale. The farm system in Boston doesn't have a lot of marketable alternatives, and the rival evaluators. Anyway, Carlos Stanton, a former Cleveland first baseman, and Eric Halmer. I always mispronounce his name. Anyway, he's in the hunt there, and then we come into Greg Holland. The president and work of Greg Holland completely altered the Rockies' pitching staff. A very good pitcher. And, of course, with the Cubs gone, John Lackey and Jake Arrieta, they didn't really deliver very much. They're out of there. And where they'll end up, who knows? Right-hand pitching for John Madden, Alex Cobb. Add him to the rotation, and this character they signed named Tyler Chatwood, know anything about him. They will plug up the most significant hole in their rotation. So, they still have John Lester, Kyle Hendricks, and if they put Cobb in there and Jose Quintano, and then they'll have, Tyler Chatwood, whom the hell he is. The Pirates trade Andrew McCutchen. The marriage between the Pirates and longtime outfielders seem to be reaching a point of expiration because McCutchen is a free agent next fall. Almost certainly will be looking for more money. Well, according to the Pittsburgh Tribune Review, Huntington said that the players who stay with one team for their entire career has been a rarity. I think he has been there. Spoke with fans about McCutchen's status and acknowledged the possibility the Pirates' most popular player would be dealt. Anything is possible. If you listen to the nonsense, how can expect these things to make sense? Say nothing, but do everything. This is Andrew McCutchen here. And I'll just retreat. This is on the 9th of December. He made the comment. And where he goes, you never know this time of the year where people end up. It's one of those situations that there's a lot of talk at the winter games. And, of course, then we get, into the natural things, spring training, and you'll still be making things. The price of Starlin Castro. This is the Mets. I haven't heard anything about the Mets lately. The L.A. Angels, second base and third base. Some salary situations there. Toronto in the outfield, Josh Danielson, excuse me, may be open to trading their third baseman. He's their third baseman there. They finished fifth in the majors in attendance, drew, $3.2 million. Incidentally, we'll have a new program all about sports, the business of sports, and we'll be looking at such things as attendance, in addition to many other things. We keep plugging it. It'll be on the Bostonred Network coming soon. Kane turns 32 next April. He's reached 135 games in a season or twice in his career. So, in other words, some of these people have some longevity going on here, +5 in defense. So he's still around. But John Carlos Stanton, he makes it to the Yankees. And I guess he'll be joining a bunch of other people with the Yankees there. They have the Judge. They have a bunch of people there. They have their closer. I think you still have their closer there. So, I mean, they'll have one hellacious team. Of course, Francisco Lindor. The Cubs have, anyway. Baseball is loaded with great young, these are shortstops. Yeah, they do have a lot of very good shortstops out there. But most teams, you need some pitching. And that is something they haven't come up with. Anthony Rizzo is mentioned here. Chris Daniels, the Orioles, and let's see, who are these people? Ryan Zimmerman. Appear to be a few potential bidders on the market there. Anyway, the D-backs, Paul Goldsmith. Yeah, what is he on? Moving on. Brandon Belt, the Giants prefer an upgrade on, but he's early in a long-term contract. Well, they didn't get him. Jose Arbia. Get him right in a minute here. Keep trying at this. So these are some of the talk so far, but Jason Castro is $8 million and so forth and so on. Lots of Collins addressed the Yankees' decision to hire Aaron Boone at a great risk. I don't know. Boone is so measured, open-minded, easy at pay grade, etc. In the 90s, we remember Earl Weaver, Billy Martin, Tommy La Russa. You want your manager to be taken from the mold of an Earl Weaver, etc. He's a different kind of person than those guys. He isn't going to try to intimidate anyone. I guess this is who they hired, Mr. Boone. Aaron Boone. Anyway, I don't know anything about Mr. Aaron Boone. Similar to Terry Francona. Remember Terry Francona. We'll have more on this later out here. Let's look at a little polling before we leave here. We did a special Gunner Joe's bus, Joe McCarthy's bus, and we went over these polls, but we won't go over the entire poll. You can listen to that broadcast that we brought it out. Spent a lot of time with these machinations here. Won some races that's almost done. In Gallup, DJ Trump is at, 36, and he's happy to be there. Triangular Trafira poll has Roy Moore ahead by 5 points. The Gravis poll has him ahead by 4 points. So in other words, a very, very close race there in Alabama. Looking at various groups, not decides who shows up. The Secretary of State, incidentally, there has predicted the turnout will be 20 to 25%. I would think for Doug Jones, he'd need a turnout more like about 30%. Not a very good turnout. But remember, they also have ICE, which you usually don't have in Alabama. People were out canvassing for Mr. Jones, and they were on slippy streets in Birmingham in some of the African-American neighborhoods. So thus it could be up there. We had on Tuesday of this week, Roy Moore made the 50% thing. 50 to 43. Another Gravis poll that was on the 5th had Jones ahead by 4. And let's see what we have now. Now we have Moore ahead by 4. So in other words, the poll has completely flopped around a bit. And we just open this up and quickly look at some things here. It'll be the last time we'll be looking at this. How likely are you to vote? 78% of these people. It was 1,254 people across Alabama were polled, the 5th through the 8th. Margin of error is 2.8% there in this race. So basically, that is where they are. 78% say they'll definitely show up. 45% strongly support DJ Trump. Somewhat approve him, 10%. Disapprove 38%. That's pretty high for Alabama. House of Representatives, we vote for a Democrat. Democrat 34%. 52% in this poll would vote for a Republican. Favorable towards Doug Jones, very favorable, 34%. Somewhat favorable, 11%, uncertain 5%. Somewhat unfavorable, 7%, and 43% are unfavorable there. More, 31% very favorable, 14% somewhat favorable. I don't know where they've been. 45% of the people very unfavorable. So more one out there. Now, if in the Senate race, who would you over there? 31% for Moore. 25%. Oh, that was in the primary. 25% for Jones. 20% for Lupus Strangelove. Didn't vote at all. 12%. Mo Brooks 5%, and so forth and so on. And if the election were held today, 49% would vote for Judge Moore, 45% for Jones, and 6% in this poll is still undecided. It's a little strange there. And leaners, 24% towards Moore, 27% towards Jones. If you're undecided which candidate, Jones showed a little momentum in this. Believe the accusations here? Well, yes, 43%, no, 37%, uncertain 20%. That's very, very. Do you believe the Washington Post? 48% yes, 38% no, and 15% uncertain. But truth for the women. Where did we go here? For women, 43%, 36% for Moore, and 20% uncertain. So that's a very big. If they trust old Uncle Roy Moore, I keep going by it there. 40% and 47% said no, but yet he won out in the poll. What else? Fundamental Protestants, non-denomination Christians, 45%. 26% not affiliated with anything, I suppose, or other. Evangelical Christians, 20%. Not that many. 8% Catholics, 1% Muslims. There weren't any Jewish people in this poll. 3% didn't get out of high school for one reason or the other. 22% graduated, some 31% some college, and surprisingly, 30% have BA degrees or whatever. And 12% are 18 to 29, 31% are 30 to 49, and 50 to 64, 32%, large number of those. And a large number of over 65 at 25%. Those would be Roy Moore people. Gender-wise, females 52%, 48% males. They will no doubt go for Judge Moore, and we don't have anything else here. Nonetheless, that is marketing by Gravis. Oh, and incomes. I guess we forgot about that one. Incomes here under $30,000, 19%. 30,000 to 50,000, unbelievable. 21% in Alabama. 50 to 100,000, 26%. That's the highest one. A lot of Republicans, I guess, had a lot of money. 100,000 to 150,000, 12%, and over 150,000, 11%. Holy moly. So the working class was underrepresented in this in terms of income, only 19%. Under 30,000, 30,000 to 21 to 50,000, 21%. So I guess about 40% of them were under 50,000. And about, another 26 were 50 to 100,000, 100,000 to 12% there. So what do you got here? 38%. And then you add another one on there, you got 48% if you go, anyway. And 10%, I just didn't know where they were. Nonetheless, that'll do it for us here on the Monday Morning Quarterback on the 11th of December, 2017. You can find us on YouTube, the RSS feed, on Spreaker, iHeartRadio, a shorter version over at Blog Talk, YouTube. Did we mention them? Okay. And various other outlets, too many to mention right now. It's gotten late. We've been at this 51 minutes. But we'll return in the week, and we have an open source report. Maybe we'll get it out now. We'll get it out later. We have a numbers man. That is the macroeconomic report from old numbers man, our alter ego. On many of these, on iHeart, on Spreaker, you can find that in YouTube, etc. across the board. Talking about the economy, talking about cryptocurrencies here, AKI. Bitcom and jobs up. Unemployment, I think 4.1%. The latest figures there, where the jobs are moving to, etc. You'll look at that part of it. Says Bostonred, our political program. Nonetheless, have a good week, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Good day.
Our political panel. Molly Ball is national political correspondent for Time magazine. Their person of the year was the Silence Breakers and the Me Too movement. Lonnie Chen is a research fellow at the Hoover Institution and a policy advisor to the Romney and Rubio presidential campaigns. We're also joined by CBS News White House and senior foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan and Ed O'Keefe, who covers Capitol Hill for the Washington Post and is a CBS News contributor. Margaret, I want to start with you on this question of Jerusalem. What do you make of this decision and the timing of it?
Well, this appears to have been a significant foreign policy and national security decision made primarily for domestic political reasons by the President of the United States. He succeeded in touching probably the most sensitive nerve in one of the most intractable conflicts in history. And this is going to make for a complicated visit for Vice President Pence, who has to head to Israel and to Egypt within just a week or so. But what the president appears to be doing here, it's interesting, with all due respect to the UN ambassador who was talking to you about making this decision. It doesn't do the thing she said. It doesn't actually move the embassy. In fact, the president on camera signed a waiver keeping the embassy in Tel Aviv. And it doesn't, for the moment, decide the fate of Jerusalem. If you listen to the president's national security team, who says, actually, we're still up for negotiation on the final status. In fact, if you ask U.S. diplomats where the city of Jerusalem is located, they still won't tell you it's located in Israel. They'll just tell you it's the political capital. So it appears to be the kind of sleight of hand that allows the president to say he achieved a campaign objective, much like the Iran deal, without necessarily changing things, because any new embassy is going to take 4 years or more to build.
All right. Let's now move back to domestic issues. Molly, let's go to Alabama here. We got a Senate race going to come to its conclusion next week. Where do you think things stand in this race?
I do not think we know how this is going to turn out. There has seemed to be a shift in the conventional wisdom toward Roy Moore. You hear a lot of predictions that he is going to prevail, because the beginning of the accusations against him is now several weeks in the rearview mirror, and a lot of Alabamians have had a chance to sort of process that. But we have still seen polls that are quite equivocal, especially in such a red state. That's pretty remarkable. And what I have heard from my sources on the ground, and I'll be in Alabama in just a few hours, is that voters are pretty powerfully conflicted. You know, these are voters who generally want to favor the Republican, all other things being equal. But you have to remember that Roy Moore, even among Republicans, is a very polarizing figure. There's a lot of Alabamians who see him as an embarrassment to the state, or just as not the sort of person, particularly considering these charges, that they want representing them. So whether that is enough to put a Democrat over the top in a state like Alabama, it's very difficult to tell.
Lonnie, let me ask you about the reaction to the RNC supporting Roy Moore this week, the president supporting Roy Moore. There was some talk about and coverage and Republicans saying, I'm through with the party because they're supporting him. Now, that can get over-torqued in today's media environment, so it's hard to know what the level of real outrage. I mean, obviously, Ben Sasse said what he said. Senator Collins was disappointed, too. What's your sense of how big a deal this is outside of Alabama for the Republican Party where it is right now?
I think that it is a developing big deal, if that makes sense. As we go into 2018, this is not the last time we're going to see some version of this movie. In other words, I think you're going to continue to see this conflict between different parts of the Republican Party. And yes, it's played out in Alabama in a really concerning fashion. A guy like Roy Moore, clearly very flawed and very problematic. But you're going to have contested primaries potentially in states like Arizona, maybe even Nevada next year. So this battlefield is just being played out right now. People are just kind of stepping onto this battlefield. So I think to the extent that we're seeing this in Alabama now, what we're seeing is a microcosm of the kinds of battles we're going to see through 2018. And for Republicans like myself, it's very concerning because what you're seeing is a fundamental split and fracture in the party that we've known has existed for some time, but now is being played out in a very public way and being played out in elections that really do matter and have policy consequences for the last 2 years of President Trump's administration, at least for his first term.
Well, and Ed, and it was the policy implications President Trump was arguing for, basically saying, whatever you may believe, I want a Republican in that seat.
It worked for him because, remember, in the last few weeks of the presidential campaign, he was running around the country saying to Republicans, you may not like me, but I'm going to appoint conservative Supreme Court justices and other conservatives to the court. And it worked. 1 in 5 voters showed up, and the exit polls showed the Supreme Court was their top concern. Moore's making the same exact argument, and that may, in fact, end up working for him. What I find interesting, and what will be very curious to track in the next few weeks, is if he wins, how quickly does that ethics investigation begin? How long does it end up taking? And what do they do if it brings forward information that suggests conduct unbecoming of a senator? Susan Collins seemed to suggest today that would be a difficult, thing to do, to expel him. But the fact that there could be a secretive ethics investigation underway will just hang over the Republican Party on Capitol Hill over the course of most of the year, most likely. And, even talking to a colleague who takes photographs up at the Capitol, he says, I suspect most people are even going to avoid getting in the elevator with him because they just don't want to be associated with him at all.
And those are related to the allegations that he denies in terms of sexual misconduct. He doesn't deny having said that homosexual activity should be illegal. He doesn't deny having said that Muslims shouldn't be allowed to serve in the United States Congress. So there are things that are being set up here that not only highlight the divisions you talked about within the Republican Party, some would say the fight for the soul and the identity, but also position the Democrats here. And that's what was so interesting with the Al Franken resignation to come, was that the Democrats seem to be positioning themselves around that identity of this is what we are not. We are not going to play those cultural
I want to get to politics. The Franken, and as you say, resignation to come. We still don't know what the end date on that is. But Lenny, I wanted to go back to something you said because Mitt Romney, who you used to work for, came out and basically took the moral position above all other Republicans, basically, and said there's no reason to support Roy Moore, and it's a stain on the party. Then Steve Bannon came back at him from the... What did you make of that back and forth? Does it have any lasting impact? And is Mitt Romney sort of emerging here as something in the Republican Party? Put a name on it.
Well, you know, he's sort of the sensible conscience of the Republican Party in a lot of ways. I mean, look, the only reason anybody cares about what Steve Bannon has to say is to the extent that people think he's a proxy for the president. To the extent that people think that Steve Bannon's expressing a point of view that the president holds, then it's relevant. Otherwise, he's just a political pundit out there with another opinion. And the question really will be to what extent the president carries through this argument. If there is a Senate campaign to be had in Utah for Governor Romney, for example, to what extent is the president willing to go out there and prosecute some argument against Mitt Romney or try to find somebody to run against him? That's the only way it becomes relevant. Otherwise, it's all just a bunch of blather as far as I'm concerned. Now, it's very concerning blather because obviously what Bannon said was completely beyond the pale, what Bannon said about Governor Romney. But I think Governor Romney is putting out there a point of view that needs to be articulated in the Senate and in the Congress beyond the 2018 election cycle.
Just so people aren't confused, Steve Bannon said that Governor Romney ducked service in Vietnam because he had a religious exemption. He went over, he was a missionary in France, which is a strange thing to say given that his president, Trump, had many, many deferments from the Vietnam War. Let me, Molly, switch to you here on the question of Al Franken. You wrote about him this week and you said he really didn't want to leave the Senate.
He really didn't seem to. I mean, if you saw the farewell speech that he gave, first of all, it took a lot of pressure to get him to resign. And what you saw was more than half of the Democratic caucus had to come out publicly. It wasn't enough. You know, we knew that there was pressure from behind the scenes on Senator Franken, and he resisted that pressure. And that was why his colleagues were forced to come out publicly all the way up to the Democratic leader, Chuck Schumer. And then finally, very grudgingly, Franken got up there on the floor of the Senate and said he believed it was ironic that he was resigning given the allegations against President Trump and against Roy Moore. This is a sort of whataboutism argument of the kind that we sometimes hear Trump make, right? Why is it fair that you're persecuting me? Look at what crooked Hillary did. It's the same kind of argument. And not only did he not apologize for his alleged misconduct, he took pains to clarify that he hadn't actually admitted to anything, and he cast doubt on some of his accusers. But he did accede to this pressure. There's a lot of resentment and disagreement in Democratic circles about whether this was the right thing to do. A lot of Democrats talking about where they're setting the standard and whether it's fair. Minnesota Democrats, very sad to lose Franken. The National Party, sad to lose someone who's probably the biggest fundraising draw for Democratic candidates across the country. And now you have a situation where, given that Minnesota was quite close in 2016, whoever the governor appoints to fill this seat is going to have to run again in 2018, and that could possibly be a tough race.
All right, we're going to pause that there. We'll be back in a moment with a little more on Al Franken. Said there was no political calculation in the Al Franken decision. Do you buy that?
No, not at all. It was a total political calculation. We know that the week before he resigned, he was already facing pressure from his colleagues who were asked to hold off, and that the morning that the final allegations surfaced, they all got together by email and text and phone calls and said, this is it, we got to do this. The party wants to make, the Democrats want to make a competency and professionalism argument in November, believing that that is the way they can take back the House and the Senate. They got to purge all these guys in order to do that, because you can't sit there and have alleged bad actors in your party if you're trying to suggest that you would run the government better. More broadly, I think viewers deserve to know this. It's no secret for those of us who cover Congress that we have all, in one way or another, been contacted by lawmakers or their aides in recent days, privately asking, what else do you have? Who's next? They are terrified of this storyline, and they know the consequences of it now could lead to much bigger problems for their party, maybe for a piece of legislation they're working on, maybe the chance of the party holding together through the elections. But members in both parties, aides in both parties, very concerned that more is to come. And look, I think it's safe to say more is to come. We don't know who exactly it will be about. It will be carefully reported, but it shows you that they are so scared now because they realize so quickly people are disappearing. And think about it. We saw a guy who served for more than 50 years kicked out. We saw one of the party's top fundraisers kicked out. A social conservative warrior, Trent Franks, had to resign amid a lot of questions about his behavior. And we've never seen this kind of a purge, not since the Civil War.
Margaret, I want to switch to taxes here because this is a big thing that's happening too, and the president wants it signed by Christmas. What have you made of his salesmanship of the tax cut bill relative to health care? Because the tax cut bill, according to both the Quinnipiac poll this week and Gallup, has only 29% support in the country. This is a president whose key skill is as a marketer, but that's not very popular for that legislation.
Well, he's marketing something that seems to be different than what is the product he's selling. And the message from the president, even just on Twitter, his constant focus on the stock market, it appears to be that he sees stocks and corporate profits as a proxy for the success of this bill and ultimately his end goal, even though on the campaign trail and when he goes out to sell this, he's talking about the benefit to the middle class and to the working class who help to support him. And it's not clear that these pieces at this point add up to a benefit for those people. At this point, though, to say that this would be a boost to corporations, undoubtedly it would, to take the corporate tax rate from 35 down to 20%. But you're not legislating how a corporation spends those profits, right? You're not necessarily forcing income growth. You're not making that worker take home more pay as a result. You can't possibly force that. You also can't force broader employment. So this gamble of how this will ultimately pay off to the broader economic benefit of the country is something that the president seems to be focusing on, whether you call it trickle-down economics or something else.
Lonnie, what did you make of Senator Rubio, who said Republicans should go back and look at a 1977 speech by President Reagan, or not President, then Governor Reagan, where he said the Republican Party has to worry about having a country club big business image?
Well, yeah, I think there's a point that he's making right now. Senator Rubio and Senator Lee had an amendment to the tax bill that would have made the child tax credit fully refundable, which would have been a huge boon to lower middle class and lower income families. And unfortunately, that was voted down by the Senate. I think that point of view, though, suggests that what we're seeing in the tax bill now to Republicans, this is more of a feature and not a bug, right? That they're actually looking at lowering the corporate tax rate. This has been something Republicans, mainstream Republicans, have talked about now for years, if not decades. And so this is actually a relatively conventional tax bill. The difficulty in selling it, though, is how do you translate a corporate tax cut into what it means for the average middle-class worker? There is a strong argument to be made that this tax bill is going to boost growth, which is going to boost wages, which is going to go into the pockets of middle-class taxpayers. But that's not really the argument you're hearing. You're hearing this is a middle-class tax cut. So there's a little bit of dissonance in the messaging that they're going to have to get straight, but I think that it won't inhibit them from getting this bill through and to the president's desk in a matter of weeks.
Molly, 30 seconds. Do you agree? And also, do Democrats have any opportunity here to take advantage of this tax process?
Well, if you believe the Democrats, they are extremely excited about the political opportunity afforded by this tax bill. It is, as you mentioned, very similar to what happened with health care, where Republicans were sort of between a rock and a hard place. They wanted to keep a campaign promise, particularly to their own base, that Republican primary voters, who they told they were going to repeal Obamacare and reform the tax system. But the bill itself was broadly unpopular, and it really is not clear whether what was worse for them politically, passing the bill or not passing the bill, given how disliked it is. And so, but what you do hear from Republicans is they feel they have to do this, A, because they think it's a good idea to cut taxes, and also because their base will be so dispirited if they don't get anything done this first year.
All right. Got to end it there. Thanks, Molly. We'll be right back.